Thank you, everyone, for attending this panel. I am really pleased to have our 4 panelists join us today. First, we have Rob Threlkeld he is Renewable Energy Manager for the General Motors Company. Rob. Next, we have David Brochu. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Recurrent Energy. David.
Thank you, Marita.
Welcome.
He should go on.
Next, we have Austin's own Danielle Murray. She's Manager of Solar Energy Services for Austin Energy. And last but not least is Glen Davis, CEO for Renewable Energy Systems, or RES Americas.
I thought I should read.
Well, welcome everyone. So we're here to discuss the state and future of renewables, which is obviously quite an intense topic to discuss. And luckily, we're in a really great place for it here in Austin, and Texas obviously being the wind leader and having the largest potential for solar growth in the country. This is a good spot to have this discussion. I wanted to start off by just kind of giving an overview and throw out some statistics, because we never have enough of those. And I'm sure that many of you who follow the energy world know that there's always the latest, this percentage by this date and this, and it's kind of overwhelming. But hopefully we can cut through a lot of that and get a good picture of exactly what we can expect going forward in the renewable energy space. But until then, I'm going to throw out some more numbers. A recent global research initiative conducted by the maritime and energy consulting and management firm DNVGL reports that 80% of global energy participants believe that the electricity system could be 70% renewable by 2050. Within that same report, almost half of those involved in the research believe that a 70% renewable energy grid is possible in the next 15 years. Now, that's probably a very bullish and aggressive outlook, but why not strive for that? Again, as I mentioned, here in Texas, we are the leader in wind. We've achieved that over the last almost 20 years now. The wind power in the U.S. has grown significantly over the last decade, as we all know. Americans use about 3 times as much wind power as they did only 7 years ago. Wind now produces 4.5% of the U.S.'s total energy supply. And the DOE believes that those numbers can grow a lot more, projecting as much as 35% wind energy in the U.S. grid by 2050. So I'd like to start off with the gentleman to my left here, Glen Davis. He, again, is the CEO of Renewable Energy Systems Americas. And I'd like for him to just sort of talk about what RES Americas does in general all around the North America, but also I wanted them to mention the Kichai wind project that they opened here in Texas. And then we'll proceed.
Sure. Thank you. And I'd like to thank the organizers of Energy Thought Summit 15 for inviting me to be part of the dialogue here. It's been fascinating. It's my first time here, so look forward to doing it in future years. Renewable Energy Systems Americas is part of the RES group, which is out of the UK and has a global footprint. Here at RES Americas, we look after both North and South America. And our business is to both develop and construct utility scale projects in the wind, solar, transmission, and energy storage space. And then recently we've launched a distributed generation business as well. It's early enough that I'm probably not going to talk much about that. Okay. But it is an interesting challenge for us in a culture that has largely faced the utility scale side of the business to think about building not just a business, but a winning business in distributed generation, given the different ways that you need to come at the business and the infrastructures that vary there. One of the projects, the wind projects that we developed and built in the last couple of years is the Kichai Project, which you mentioned. It's a 110 megawatt project in Texas that we sold to Enbridge. There are a few things that are unique about it. 2 of them are probably, but one is certainly just unique to us, which is it's the first time that we as a constructor self-performed the erection of the wind turbines there, which is a big step for our business. It's also notable because the ground that we're on is awash with pipelines and drilling activity, and so when we started developing the project, that wasn't the case, and so it's an interesting study from that perspective on how the E&P boom has affected wind power in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect because it created some significant challenges. The third aspect, though, which is most relevant for this panel, is that the power purchase agreement we signed was with Microsoft. And it was really one of the first that I'm aware of that type of power purchase agreement with an international, a global corporation, which began what is, I wouldn't call it a shift so much as an expansion of the customer base from pretty much utilities only to utilities plus corporates of that nature. And Rob can talk a bit about what General Motors is doing in that same regard. But it is a trend that has expanded our ability to reach the market and created different types of ways to reach the market. But I think it has broader structural implications to the wholesale side of the business.
And I'd like to follow up there with a question that I think affects all of you. You know, the U.S. Congress passed a retroactive one-year extension of the production tax credit in December. For projects that were supposed to start construction by the end of 2014. I know that that's helped the wind industry significantly, but it's, you know, a constant hot potato controversial topic depending on the way that political winds blow. And to add to that, in March, the IRS released its guidance that they were going to extend the deadline for 2016. I'm curious, you know, how necessary does the production tax credit and also the investment tax credit play in how you plan future projects? Does the uncertainty of it mean that you make it less of a priority, et cetera?
Right. Would you like me to?
Yeah, please, Glen.
Take a shot at that. You know, certainly the presence of the production tax credit helps the economics of the projects, helps them compete. Especially in a market right now where gas prices have come down. Same with investment tax credit. So better to have it than not have it from the point of view of trying to develop and build these projects. Your question was, is it necessary? And I think what may be more necessary than having the production tax credit is certainty around it.
Right.
Because if you're a customer and the production tax credit has expired, but it may come back, you're not going to make any decision. You're going to wait. If you know that it's gone, then you may make a decision. Now, from a industry perspective, if it is gone entirely, then you're going to see fewer wind projects built, fewer megawatts built. But my own view is there will still be wind projects built. What the production tax credit and to some degree the investment tax credit is functioning as well is a substitute for a carbon tax or some sort of carbon pricing, right? And if you foresee production tax credit, for example, getting ramped down in the next time that PTC is addressing Congress, they may go back to what had been agreed in December but vetoed by the president, which is a ramp down. If you expect that to be the future, we would like to see that then roll into some kind of transparent carbon pricing, and you know, CPP and programs in California are moving in that direction, but something that is really appropriately putting the right value on carbon so that wind and solar and any other technology that isn't producing carbon can see the benefit. Thank you.
So let's kind of focus a little bit more on Texas and narrow it down. So the advanced energy market is a $16 billion revenue source in Texas, and that includes renewables, advanced technologies of that infrastructure, et cetera, and that's 8% of the total U.S. market. So Texas that's a lot of money. Apparently it's enough money to buy the Dallas Cowboys 5 times over. That's a lot. You know, but in Texas, obviously, you know, these political winds blow quite frequently here. And so in doing business in Texas, as you look at this type of uncertainty politically with these types of tax incentives, you know, Texas has a renewable portfolio standard that was created in 1999, sort of a grand bargain when we deregulated our energy market. Texas passed that goal for 2,000 megawatts. They increased it to 10,000 megawatts to be met by 2025, and we blew past that goal 5 years ago. So there's a lot of success for that. But in the legislature, Senator Frazier has introduced a bill that would basically repeal that, with basically saying that mission has been accomplished, mission accomplished. It would freeze the state's renewable energy credit program, and it would also stop the completion or the expansion of the competitive renewable energy zone. which not only helps wind, but also helps the bottlenecks of natural gas as well out in West Texas. So I'm curious, sort of, what does that say when you're looking at a market? And David, I'll ask you as well. Like, what kind of message does that send? Do you think that is okay? You would move forward with working in markets like Texas with that kind of an attitude? Do you think mission has been accomplished? And in lieu of any kind of a renewable carve out for solar, how do you see the Texas market flourishing?
Well, thank you. I think the Texas market for solar is going to grow anyway. We see that ERCOT has put out forecasts of anywhere from 5 to 15 or 16 gigawatts over the next 10 or 15 years. We see the demand growing in places, Austin Energy, where we have 150 megawatt PPA, Georgetown recently, San Antonio. You see demand coming from the consumer. So I don't think this type of bill is going to stop that demand from coming. I think it sends a bad message to the market, though, in that it's not accomplished. I mean, we're not here just to do a little bit, 10 or 15 gigawatts of wind and 5 or 10 gigawatts of solar. I mean, there's a massive transformation in this energy industry that's ongoing. It started now, and I think it started with RPS demands and incentives. It's moving now towards, much like Rob can talk about what Glen has said, demand from large users of electricity, demand from municipalities and their ratepayers and their consumers, and that demand continues to grow, and I think we'll see it grow. If I can just comment on the ITC drop, I think it's an unfortunate thing as well. The ITC is not just a substitute for carbon tax. The ITC is an economic engine that has created a huge amount of work. And right now with the drop, the difference between construction and economic development in 2016 versus 2017 is going to be phenomenal, not just in Texas, California, across the country because of that drop. So I think we would say the ITC has done a great job. We're not done yet. And until we see that demand pick up and move forward, it should stay in place. And I just think it's a bad idea to try to remove the RPS in Texas. It has no negative impact, so why?
Right, exactly. It's a sort of a symbolic move that makes you kind of wonder. So to discuss a little bit more about the solar world here, global solar energy installations have crossed over into 54 gigawatts this year, and costs for solar have fallen 60 to 70% and are continuing to drop. So when we talk about this country and the world really being primed, especially in Texas, as I mentioned, #1 potential for solar growth, that's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of investment to come into an area, and you want to hope that you're embracing everyone with open arms. You also mentioned the Austin Energy deal, that you have the 20-year, 150 megawatt solar contract. I'd love for you to discuss that, and then Danielle, I'd like to follow up with you about some questions about it as well.
Sure, yeah, we can talk a little bit about it. I have a 150 watt light bulb and a 150 megawatt power plant that we're building. So it's really an exciting project that we're working on. It's a West Texas project. 100% of the energy and renewable credits are coming to Austin Energy. So really, I think part of that demand from the consumers that has sort of started that program, and we'll keep it going. And the exciting thing I think about it is where we see ourselves today. The cost of renewable energy, the construction cost and the cost of developing solar and wind and others has dropped so quickly over the last 5 years that we're providing very competitive rates, and it's not something that ratepayers are going to be impacted by. So that's the exciting part about it. It is constructed, beginning construction this year. It will be built by 2016. It will be taking advantage of the federal investment tax credit.
That's great. And Danielle, what does a deal like this mean for the new utility business model, and what lessons can other utilities learn from the type of collaboration that Austin Energy has had?
Yeah, I mean, so Austin Energy has been a leader in solar for a very long time, decades. And this is just the latest feather in our hat, I think, and it's really showing that early investment has paid off, because we had both the know-how and the interest to be out ahead of the game and to be able to get these great deals as they're coming out. Frankly, before there's a lot of competition from other utilities here in Texas for that same power. I would assume if we had 5 other utilities trying to build on that same CREZ line, we would not be paying what we're going to be paying. So I think it's really benefited us to be ahead of the ball there. And it's great for us, obviously, as a utility here in Austin that has this demand from our customers for more and more renewable energy, to be able to get it at such a great price that it isn't going to be negatively impacting our affordability goals. Whether or not we can get more projects at that price is yet to be seen, but if we can, I mean, that's a game changer in terms of our build-out strategy. We still need to address when is that power actually produced, and is the transmission there for it. But it's a really big step towards being able to provide ever higher amounts of renewables for the city. And our latest council goal is 55% renewable by 2025, so we've got a lot to do.
Hearing a utility talk about competing with other utilities to sign a solar PPA made this whole trip worth it.
Yeah, it's refreshing news.
It didn't feel that way. Let me just say.
So Danielle, on that note, the role that cities can play in smart cities, in Texas, we're lucky that, Austin and San Antonio are rank at the top, not only within Texas, but nationally as cities that are engaged in solar. As much as the competitive market in Texas gets us to a lot of really great places, this is maybe one area where, the competitive utilities inside the state, their solar rankings are a lot lower. So I'm just curious, what do you see as benefits to having municipally owned entities? Obviously, Georgetown, which is a muni just north of us here, recently announced that they're going 100% renewable. How is it possible for municipal utilities to be able to achieve these strides?
I mean, I think the first part is that we are a municipal entity and we are driven by local policy, and we are much more responsive to our customers, who are also the citizens in this area, who are telling their representatives what they want to see out of their local utility and telling us directly, which is very different from an investor-owned utility where they're responsive to their shareholders, not to their customers per se, especially if they're in a more captive market like out in California, let's say. So, we've here in Austin as well as San Antonio, we've been driven by the people, and that's who we're responding to. We also have to take into account those affordability goals, and we need to be able to run a reliable utility, and I think we've done a great job at managing all three of those. But again, the reason we have the amount of solar and other renewables in our portfolio that we do are because we have been directed by council to do so. To the extent that we can get contracts for renewables that are cheaper than other alternatives, I mean, we'll do it all day long if that's available, but what's gotten us to where we're at without that price signal to date was that commitment from the community and from our city councilors.
Austin Energy is one of the most renowned programs in net metering value of solar tariffs in the country. I just want to open that conversation up to everyone on the panel to kind of dive in and talk about, how valuing the grid from distributed energy, what kind of customer empowerment, how does that lead to a better return for the utility actually to engage their customers on that vein, and just in general, what kind of value can we make sure that we maintain for people when they're looking at investing in these types of systems on their homes?
So maybe I can explain this and you guys can pitch in, but we previously had net metering. Again, that's part of what got us to where we're at in terms of local distributed generation. The problem is that we also had very progressive rates, and so we had what's called an inverted block structure, where the more energy you use each month, you move into higher cost tiers for that electricity, which is a very progressive model. But the problem is, if you add solar to that, you start incenting those customers who are bigger consumers more highly than you incent customers who are in smaller homes or have more energy efficient homes who want to go solar. So big users get a big value per kWh that they reduce, and small users get a small value. So there's an inequity amongst solar customers, and then you see the market shift towards those particular types of customers. And then there's inequities between solar and non-solar customers, and you get cost shifting because we are incenting these larger consumers to go solar and get that 15, 20 cent per kilowatt hour value out of their system, which is great for them, but it's pushing some costs onto the other customers. So what we came up with, we were the first in the country to come up with a value of solar tariff. And what that does is puts an actual price on the solar generation, including the actual energy, comparing that to, say, buying natural gas from the market, or buying generation from the ERCOT market, as well as our reductions in transmission and distribution costs, and cost to distribution if there are extras, and environmental value, et cetera. So we actually go through all these subcomponents and put a value on that. And I think people will disagree on exactly what those values should be, but we go through a third-party assessment of that, and that goes through a lot of public stakeholder process. And we come out with a value that currently is at about 10 cents actually for 2015. And that's actually right in the middle of our tiers. So we end up with this value that we pay customers for every kilowatt hour they produce. That's somewhere in the middle of what they would have gotten under net metering. So you've created this fair value structure for all of the solar customers. They're all getting the same value per kilowatt hour they produce. And they use those credits to offset whatever they consume in their home at their normal residential rate structure. So we as a utility are still recovering all of the costs to serve that customer, which is how we designed that rate in the first place. And meanwhile, they can produce all the solar they want, and we as a utility are revenue neutral, and our other customers aren't getting any extra costs shifted onto them that they wouldn't have if we were getting power from any other source.
Was that retroactive to systems that were already installed?
Yep, every system that was installed moved on to the value of solar. It's actually part of our residential electric tariff now. So
Can I get
there
that
was a
right?
learning curve in that, and it takes some educating, but I think it's really helped remove that battle that you're seeing in some of the other states.
I was kidding. I was going to say, can I get that rate? But I want to comment because I think that's really exciting because it's not just a net metering question, which is what you often hear, and the argument is around should net metering be allowed? It's net metering and the tariff structure that's really important, and I think that this is a really exciting way of solving that problem, which is fair and still provides an incentive to those solar customers. So I think it's very exciting.
Glenn, you mentioned that RES Americas is expanding into the distributed generation realm as well. Can you kind of explain the dichotomy between the two and how, as a company, you all are sort of merging them as a goal, ultimately?
Yeah, if there's a dichotomy, I don't know that it's so much from the business or market perspective. You could argue that there's a bit of cannibalization of one to the other, but I think generally we feel like both segments, utility scale and distributed, are going to move forward apace. The challenge is really more internal, because what we see as necessary to compete and offer a winning strategy in the distributed side is very different culturally. It's very different organizationally than the type of business we've been in historically. So the real challenge for us is how do we foster that in a way? I mean, I go back to Vivint Solar, who has built its success really on this idea of taking college students from Utah who have historically done missions and have learned through the religious missions that they're doing how to present themselves and get to the kitchen table to talk about one thing, and now they're using that to sell solar. And it's a very kind of different winning strategy than you'd ever see in the utility scale side of things. So we have to figure out what's our winning strategy in distributed generation.
Interesting. Do you find that that changes a lot of the way that your business models have typically run, or is it
It's
just
too early
it's too early?
It's too early to tell.
Okay. So Rob, down there, I have not forgotten about you, I promise.
I'm the silent one.
Yeah.
I'm here actually auditing the panel.
So we mentioned the roles that cities can play, and we mentioned the state. But you work at a GM basically to be a leader in the corporate world in terms of renewable energy growth. And I'd like for you to talk about that and how you feel that that companies can be drivers of this technology without having to rely on subsidies necessarily, without having to rely on the politics of whichever locale they're in, as long as they have a committed mission. So I would like for you to maybe talk about GM's role and kind of how you see your place.
Sure. Well, a lot of for our activities really go back into the 90s when we started looking at renewable energy and started sourcing landfill gas to our facilities, and we saw the cost savings and the values associated with that. So with us, it's been kind of a long history with that, and it just kind of grew into as the other renewables became, even in the infant stages. Our first renewable project for solar was in 2004 and 5. So we got into the early markets of what the PPA was, how it was derived, and the value that it could bring, and then basically it was an education beyond that on the PPA side of how companies and large corporations through our contacts with NGOs like the World Resources Institute, World Wildlife Federation, to educate others that could do that. Fast forward to now where the cost of renewables have come down significantly. Wind, solar, we've all seen that, and it's been commented on the panel today, where it makes sense for us to potentially own it in some cases. but to further advance the education in the business side community of things through, we signed on to the Buyers Principles, which now has about 25 companies signed on, I think, through the World Wildlife Federation, through the World Resources Institute, and then with the Business Renewables Center that's run through the Rocky Mountain Institute. You might say, geez, there's a lot of NGOs engaged with this, but I think it's also the NGOs and the corporations that understand the costs have come down significantly. We're the ones that are very interested because it drives our business bottom line immediately to our stakeholders and shareholders to share that. And there's a lot of issues around regulators and utilities not allowing large corporations to do that. And we can do that individually. I can easily work with the state of Michigan, that's our home base, to do that. But does that benefit the other buyers and purchasers of utilities in that state? So you're starting to see the large corporations come together, and where companies have strongholds in those states to really push to the regulators, the public utility commissions, to the utilities that where our interest, we know this can be done economically. We see it in various states. We see it in various countries. And so you're going to see a lot of push to the large corporations signing on to PPAs, going around the utilities if we have to in some cases, to make that cost, because we see the cost. And obviously we're in it to make a profit, on our profit, but to save our stakeholders and shareholders, the bottom line when it comes to returns. So that's really where our engagement, and then on-site, as we've been able to do some on-site procurement. do have global responsibilities. So, as we were talking to PTC and some of that earlier, I hear it. I also get into net metering, and I hear it. Net metering less of a degree because in places where we've got our facilities, they don't typically get into a net metering concern, even when we're talking 5 megawatts of solar in a lot of cases. But in a few cases, we have had those discussions with the utility. But on the ITC and the PTC extensions or not extensions, I've got enough globally that it's not having a significant impact on my component of it when it comes from a procurer of large energy. Because I think I procure so much that the costs irrelevant of the PTC and ITC extensions are going to be there. It's kind of, Glenn said, there will still be developed projects going on, and you're going to see some. I know for our standpoint, we would still, I've seen it with and without the ITC and PTC.
I just wanted to ask, does GM buy renewable energy credits, or do you do all of the renewable procurement through PPAs where you're buying a bundled energy and green?
Okay, in most cases, we do not buy the renewable energy credits, although there was an article in the USA Today last week where we were the largest procurer of carbon credits. And that was in a different program under the Chevy Carbon Reduction Initiative. So that was geared towards products. So in some cases, yes, when it's a product kind of related where it's net neutral to the product. When it comes to on-site procurement and how we source our renewables, no, we do not buy the actual credits for the facility.
You buy energy from renewable sources.
Yep. That's a very good question.
Well, it just I think it speaks to what the company's motivations are. Right. If you're out there buying RECs, there's a marketing aspect to it, I think. If you're buying the energy, then it's a program. You're really trying to meet your needs.
Yeah. You mentioned, Glenn, Microsoft and GM, obviously. What role do you think, or have you noticed over the last 5 years, let's say, the role of corporations coming to you, and David as well, like wanting to increase their portfolio of renewable energy going forward, and do you notice any trends in that realm?
Yeah, it's definitely on the rise. We have, on the heels of doing the Kichai deal, we then created a department. Donna's sitting here. She's part of that department to focus on that segment of the market, which we never had that focus before. The Microsoft deal, it came to us through a more generic origination exercise that we were doing. But now there's a focus, and the market is rising up to meet that. There's a long way to go. Yeah. It's not a huge list of companies that fit into that box that says they're big enough and have a strong enough credit to be a customer of 100 megawatt plus, and they've built up the infrastructure internally to do it. Mm-hmm. But the trend is up.
That's good news. So, in addition to drivers from the private market, let's talk about 111D, also known as the Clean Power Plan, and how that can be a driver for for not only growth potentially in Texas, depending on what the Texas government decides to do in terms of abiding by that or not, but other states as well. But what is that going to look like? You mentioned a carbon tax. I mean, it is not a carbon tax, but in effect, some could calculate it as such. So I'm curious, like, Texas, depending on who you're talking to, I mean, we're already kind of on the road to achieving a lot of those goals anyways. So I'm just curious, and this is open to everyone here, as to what role you think that the Clean Power Plan is going to affect renewables going forward.
If I can just chime in,
Sure.
First on the demand from large corporations, I see that as not just large corporations. What I see is a trend shift from an RPS or a mandated renewable to a consumer demand, really, because it's companies and consumers, and even quite frankly, what we're doing with Austin Energy and what's going on in Texas with solar, it's a demand that's coming from the local municipality or the local cities. So I think that's the disruption in the market that's coming, and I think it's going to come a lot faster than we think. 111D is a tool that states who are also interested in continuing to incent that renewable development can use that in a positive way to help meet their goals. In Texas, Texas is not likely to let the federal government come in here and tell them what to do. So I'm pretty sure Texas is going to have a plan this time, and they're going to be ready to go with something. And I wouldn't be surprised if it includes something for renewables as well, since it's a strong market here and it's a strong economy here. So.
I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and Donna Nelson, who's head of the PUC here in Texas, was on one of the panels, and the final question was, what keeps you up at night? And people were giving long explanations. Her answer was, Clean Power Plan, full stop. That's all she said. So, it's at least from one of the commissioners, it's over my dead body kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, okay. So, and I think that's sort of.
Weren't we just talking about an open gun carry along here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I heard something.
So,
At
anyway.
least we keep it all, the same here.
Hey, I just want to say, I don't live here now, but I grew up in Texas. I'm an Aggie, and I am so happy to be back here now. It's a different conversation than other parts of the country. So.
That is for sure true. Okay, so Danielle, from the city perspective, how do you all take 111D and look at it?
I mean, honestly, this is an area where being out ahead of the game might hurt us, and if they don't provide some grandfathering of the efforts we've already made, we might be in trouble. I mean, it gets harder and harder to do these incremental projects, so greenhouse gas reductions. So we are, of course, asking for that they do take into consideration what we've already done or will have done by the time it comes into effect. That's our biggest ask. Otherwise, it's in line with our business already, so it's not a big threat to us. And frankly, it'd be great to see the rest of the state have to get up to the kind of levels that we're working at in terms of our percents renewable and our greenhouse gas emissions. So, as an environmentalist, I'm happy to see it, and I hope that the rest of the state gets on board and this suit goes away. But from Austin Energy specifically's perspective, we do hope that we get credit for the work we're doing right now.
And well, and Austin Energy and as CPS, as we mentioned, and others, even in Green Mountain. I mean, there are a lot of companies and entities in the state that have showed we can get here. We're already on the way. So
Don't penalize us for
you guys are a good example for Texas for sure. Well, and also in terms of complying with the clean power plan. Storage is going to be a significant factor in that as we move out into the 2030s and beyond. So I'd like to open the question of storage up to everyone, and is it the holy grail? What does a world with storage at the degree that we need it, let's say just even in Texas and the United States, what does it look like, and how do all pieces fit together, Glen?
Yeah, I didn't sit in that panel that said storage was the holy grail. I guess I'm not a subscriber to that necessarily. I think, you could probably craft the holy grail out of some combination of reliability and environmental responsibility and cost, right? And so you got to keep in mind the higher level objectives here. We are a leader in the storage space, wholesale in front of the meter type storage. And so it's a big part of our business, but I'm reluctant to elevate it to that level what I will enthusiastically say is I think it will increasingly play an important role in getting to that holy grail that I just described and maintaining reliability as you bring more renewables on, But there are other ways to do that. There are multiple ways that you can increase. You mentioned the DOE study, and they get into it in fair detail there without relying entirely on storage to model how renewable penetration can go from where it is today to 35% or higher.
In your business, since you deal both with the renewable energy component and also the storage component, do you bundle those types of services when you're marketing to people? Are you increasingly selling them together?
It's customer specific.
Yeah.
In a large grid, you're probably maybe I could use more descriptive words, but just generally speaking, in a large grid, placing storage strategically within the overall grid is generally going to be more effective. If you're in a smaller grid where balancing is more difficult, there are fewer pieces to play with to balance, then it's important for the grid operator to get more balanced power coming in from the generation sources. That tends to push the storage out towards the generation. It's a lot more complex answer than that, but we'll stop there.
Interesting. David?
Sure. So I think the exciting thing about storage is if you look at the cost curve on it and where it can go, where it is going and where it can go with both the demand from electric vehicles and just the demand in the market today. We're co-locating storage on at least one of our projects for 2016. We're bidding a lot of storage, both large scale and some smaller scale. I agree with what Glen said. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to end up, one or the other, or probably a combination of both. But we do see that cost curve and the opportunity for that cost curve to get to the point where it can be a substantial component of and really impact and support the reliability. I think as you see us going from, single and teens of renewable energy in this country up into the 20, 30, 40, 50% renewable energy, you're going to see a much larger demand for it just to help balance out the grid.
I came across this quote from the DNV GL report that I mentioned earlier, and it says the renewables are too often conceived as something to be integrated into status quo arrangement, and a smarter approach is needed. And I thought that was just a sort of interesting way. I mean, we're still sort of, I think, at the place where we're trying to integrate, and with storage coming, it's all kind of, we're going from piecemeal to more of a holistic approach as we deploy. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that statement, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you go back just a few years and you look at the way interconnection for wind or for solar is done, we're paying for a pipe for interconnection for something we only use part of the day. Yeah. And so I think there was sort of a one-size-fits-all approach in the past, but you see that changing. Technology is driving that with smart grids and the ability to remotely control, and I think that's actually where storage is going to play an important role to really fill in those gaps and help us more economically create and manage the grid that we need for a large renewable penetration.
And I think that's the big question that's there for utilities and grid operators is what's the value proposition for us? Where does the cost have to come down to for it to make sense to deploy solar and storage at scale, the two together? And I think we at AE and many other utilities are starting to delve into storage, and we've got a pilot project that we're going to be starting with our community solar project where we're looking at distribution scale or larger utility scale on the distribution feeder, co-locating that storage with the PV, and then looking at also opportunities for behind the meter or at least customer-sited storage, and what are the different value streams for each of those products, what are the technical capabilities of them, and as we do those early pilots, I think we will help figure out what the price points are, what the values are to us as a utility and to the customers, and then we need to make markets for it to drive the private sector to move into those niches. It's not all about the utility coming in and doing the whole thing. It's about creating an environment where others can bring their solutions to bear.
Well, and you mentioned your community solar project. I don't know if you can speak to that briefly. I know that y'all are still working on it and still in process. But these types of, I think, projects and pilots that Austin Energy is taking, I think it really shows your leadership. And obviously, I think we'd be amiss to talk about renewables and not talk about the equity. And I think that having a community solar project underway, and then CPS is the rooftop solar leasing potential that they're trying to go about. So I would just like to know kind of what your vision is for that project.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's what kind of keeps me up at night is the solar is not going to make sense for everybody. National studies show about 25% of homes can go solar, and that's really from a technical perspective. So there's a lot of customers here in Austin who who don't own their homes, they're renters, they don't, if they have their home, they have a shaded roof, whatever. So there are a lot of people who don't even have the physical access to it, let alone the financial access to purchase a solar system. Community solar is one of the first steps that we, and again, many other utilities are starting to look at to expand access to solar. So we're putting in a 2 to 4 megawatt project out, co-located with one of our substations on the east side of Austin, and with a storage project that's going to follow. And it's a great opportunity, the first of hopefully many, to start opening up a program for folks who can't, or for whatever reason don't want to go solar at their own home, to subscribe to this project, get renewable power delivered to them on the grid, and take part in this economy that a lot of people are excited about and they want to show their support for. Maybe they are willing to pay a small premium for it at this point to support this future that is 55% renewable, let's say. And it's a big step, I think, to be able to offer choice to our customers, even if we are in a monopoly municipal utility scenario, giving our customers opportunities, whether it's our Green Choice program, which is primarily wind power, or local solar, or solar on their own roof.
It's really great. I'm very excited personally about that project. So Rob, on the topic of distributed resources and storage, I know that GM, you're focusing on a much larger manufacturing sort of production level renewable energy scale, but because the electric vehicles that you all do have in your offerings, I'm curious what role you see electric vehicle storage on this distributed level helping this whole renewable sort of conundrum.
Well, in reality, your electric vehicle now, I mean, like with the General Motors on the OnStar product, but a lot of automotive manufacturers have the ability to talk to cars and vice versa now, can already kind of use the car charging as kind of manipulating how a battery would operate. So in reality, you can technically do that with your vehicle. Now, to pull the battery, the charge back from the battery, right now, that is definitely still in the early stages, warranty costs and everything else, because the electric vehicle is still in its early stages. So I would say as the future grows, technology grows, the consumer, the whole connected consumer and what you do at home, I'm sure at some point there will be a point where everybody, you have that capability to do that. Now, secondary use of electric vehicle batteries, I'm sure, there's been a lot of internal deliberations and discussions around that, but the battery technology is advancing so quickly as well. So there's a lot of that question of where does the value come in, when do you reuse, when do you not reuse, discussion that's taking place. I mean, I'm on the peripheral of a lot of that, but then I also see the value of testing it like utilities, testing it on our side, because we have large demand swings on our facilities. It's not a huge cost to us, but in the future it could be, and what can we do internally with our own resources to do and support that activity. So it's definitely a lot more to come. I'm very much a student of what's going on, talked with a lot of utilities on it, and you'll see demand side management with batteries a key component of the grid going forward. I mean, it has to. I mean, obviously the renewables are there when you need them sometimes, and they're not there when you need them sometimes. So.
I guess we're kind of getting near the end, and before we open it up to questions, I would just like to open a question that I'm going to propose to all of you, which is basically, if you had to pick one or two of your top priorities or concerns, projections, things that make you excited about what's going on, anything that you think of that comes to mind, what would it be, and what can we look forward to in the renewable space? Glenn, we'll start with you.
The thing that I think about, but it's hard, it's a difficult challenge, is how do we, as a company, prepare ourselves for the next crisis, the next dislocation in the world or in our market that's going to change things in a way we're not talking about right now? And not only prepare ourselves so that we can survive it, but actually that we can benefit from it, right? And so, it could be anything from war to some kind of economic crisis. I mean, interest rates. Talk about now, the big discussion now is, okay, gas prices are hitting bottom. What does that mean for competitiveness? If interest rates go up, when you look at new generation, interest rates will affect renewables, solar and wind, twice what rising interest rates affect gas-fired generation, because the cost of embedded in a PPA for a gas-fired project is only 50% capital, and the other 50% is gas price. Whereas for a renewable, it's call it 95% of the PPA price is directly related to capital for which you're borrowing or you're investing. So a rising interest rate environment is going to hurt renewables as a choice for future generation disproportionately. You have other types of crisis, some kind of climate crisis happens that could benefit our business. And then the big topic is cybersecurity, right? If the grid is attacked, if there's a blackout, what's that going to mean for my business, both as a threat but also as an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, it's from a different perspective, but working for a municipal utility, or really for any utility these days, the question for me is how can we be more nimble and keep up with changes in the market, let alone these bigger potential catastrophes, whether they're weather-related or financial. But, it's an institution, it's a municipal government, and they do not always move that quickly. And so how can we come up with these, we have, I think, great minds and great ideas and great desires to do these bigger, more environmentally friendly, more innovative things, but how do we do it within this structure that is traditionally not geared towards moving quickly and having multiple programs or products out and running within months or even years. So, trying to work within those systems but get these innovative programs off the ground keeps me up day and night.
You looked a little tired.
Yeah.
I think the positive is we're bringing lots of projects forward to build in 2016 that we wouldn't otherwise build. A disruption like that in the industry is going to impact not just people in our company, but thousands of jobs that you got to do a lot of work one year and it won't be there the next year. It's not going to kill the industry. I think being able to plan for that and being able to smooth that out would be nice. But the disruption is really how the market changes, how the market reacts, and how to remain competitive so that we can still continue to serve the growing demand for renewables and for solar specifically that's out there. So I think that's working through that time period is probably my biggest concern.
Rob?
Well, I'd say for mine, and it really kind of comes down to perseverance and getting a lot of the projects done. I mean, we were a large global corporation, so when we announce one project, it is, well, why didn't my plant get that? Or why did my plant get that? Or why did my plant get that? And you're not, and each plant has its own budget. So when we do a project and we've ranked them globally, what we do and how we do it, it still is coming back to is addressing that question we get internally. It's kind of like working for the government too in some degree. We're a large corporation and it works through a whole process and people change. So, it's educating, other buyers in the business space as well. The process to get that through is not a very easy process internally. There's a lot of reviews and discussions. You're signing on a 15-year commitment. And I think for our standpoint, in a lot of cases on the PPAs, is trying to narrow that down, I think, as the prices come down to reduce those terms, because I think new technology, especially in solar coming forward, I always get that question. It's easy to answer to some degree in the wind industry because it's generated, and you can kind of look at the solar industry. System capacity factors, average 20%. Is the next technology out there going to be 50%? Now, it's not going to be in the next few years, but I mean, where does that come into play? And to some degree, I answer that also, that we're not covering 100% of our facilities with solar either, so you always got that space available as well. But that question gets asked a lot, and obviously in the renewable and especially the solar space, new technology will come at some point that improves the light capture efficiency that we currently see on the market, and how does that impact and disrupt where we currently are when you look at the PPA models and what companies do on site.
You mentioned does that mean that your plant managers really want a lot of renewable energy?
Well, it is on part of their package compensation and costs on cost per unit. When we look at cost per unit, electricity and energy is a key component of that. Environmental stewardship is one of them. So renewable energy, they are very astute to what goes on in that area. And I see a lot of them tie it back to electric vehicle and product and sustainability of manufacturing.
Just being aligned across the board.
Yep.
Glenn and I are here to help.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, then, I'd like to open up to any questions from the audience. There we go. He's coming with a microphone if you'd like to speak.
Just a point of clarification. You have mentioned a study several times.
Yes.
Could you give me or us the reference for that?
Sure. It was conducted by a global maritime energy sort of infrastructure consultancy firm called DNVGL.
Okay.
Yeah, D as in David, Nate, Victor, GL.
Okay.
And yes, it was 80% of global energy participants believe the electricity system can be 70% renewable by 2050.
Is this a survey or is it
Well,
a study?
it was a survey and a larger report conducted by this firm, and within that, then the
and
research.
the report is called?
It's called. I have it here somewhere. Beyond Integration: 3 Dynamics Reshaping Renewables and the Grid.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
I mean, I see a lot of concerns about the ITC and the finishing of the ITC and the jobs, but this is not news, right? The ITC was created to be an incentive to the industry, and I have to believe the industry is prepared to survive at this level. So what you guys have been doing other than counting on technology costs, to improve the efficiency of the system to be able to compete in an environment where you don't depend on a tax incentive?
That's a good question. So from our standpoint, a big portion of the cost, as Glenn said, is the capital cost of constructing the plant. I think you see the equipment, coming down in costs quite significantly. The solar panels, in particularly. We have been working with our construction partners and some of the other suppliers, inverters and trackers, to really look at how we bring together all the components in a utility scale solar project much more efficiently, much more like a manufacturing facility, panelization and ready to just drop in and construct very quickly. And that's a place where we see costs post 2016 coming down much more rapidly. A lot of the cost declines we've seen up to this point, and I think a lot of this is driven by the ITC. The investment we've been able to make in this market has really helped drive the costs out of the components themselves. But now you're looking at large scale production where I think there's still an opportunity to drive those costs out much quicker on that side. So I think that's a big part of it. And also there's technologies and tracking technologies and control technologies that can help us maximize the energy out of these systems as well.
Developments. Central Texas is crawling with residential developments, and I've been contacting them over the last few months, trying to interest them in either rooftop solar, community solar. No interest, zero. I'm just wondering if any of you are reaching out RES or have strategies. I've heard news recently that California is actually undertaking some initiative to actually target housing developers, because, I mean, they're on the spot. They're building 1,500 home developments west of Austin right now. And what a great opportunity from the get-go to, install renewable ready homes or community solar.
Yeah, and we actually do see, I mean, not every developer, I agree, every single home that goes in, if it's not shaded by a tree, should have solar on it, and moreover for development. We do have a couple developers here who are very active in that. Some of the local ones, as well as some of the larger national ones like Lennar and KB Homes are pretty active on the solar side of things, and they're actively pursuing innovative financing mechanisms to get solar on those roofs and take advantage of our local incentives, et cetera. So we do see some activity here, but again, that is in large part, I think, because we have a environment and a rate structure that's conducive to that. And I think you don't see it throughout the rest of Central Texas necessarily. I mean, depends where you're looking at, but if the local utility doesn't have a rate structure, whether it's net metering or value of solar or similar, there's not going to be a lot of motivation for those folks to put it in there. If they can't show their customers there's going to be value for that, their customers being the homeowners.
Right. I'm happy to report that Pedernales Electric apparently is pursuing a utility-scale solar project right now. They have an RPF, and they're going through that right now. So there's prospects out there.
I wanted to mention, sort of a side note, but related. I work for Environmental Defense Fund, and we're on the board of the Pecan Street project. I'm working on, in the next month, we're going to be releasing a large report about emissions reductions that have happened thus far in the 5 years that they've had technologies deployed. Very good news there, but I think that this helps build that case, and hopefully maybe having some data will help, or you have, you know, a new development, less than 10 years old, every home is green built, and when you deploy solar PV, when you deploy solar PV plus electric vehicles, when you incorporate demand response and time of use pricing, what can be achieved by real world people who are just going about their lives, who haven't really noticed much of a sacrifice at all. And so just be on the lookout for that, and I think that maybe having more data and case studies can help bring awareness to developers, especially in Texas, but around the country, that, as we were saying, is a holistic approach. We're going to have to look at not only the way we construct our grid, but as our communities in one big picture, and not this kind of piecemeal where we're retrofitting later down the road.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting is, say, at the Rough Hollow development out there in West Travis County, there's 15 builders. And I did a survey of all 15 builders, and only four of them, mentioned sustainability or energy efficiency in their, marketing web pages. But that all just has to do with, insulation and double pane windows and so on, HVAC systems and so on. But they all stop short of, let's do some on-site generation. So anyway.
Thank you.
My name is Hala Balouz. I'm the president of Electric Power Engineers, consultants on transmission and distribution, also president of the Texas Renewable Energy Industries Alliance. I'm speaking on behalf of the Alliance. The Texas Renewable Energy Industry Alliance has brought on board the Energy Storage Association, the Wind Coalition, and other components of the big picture here recently. And I'm very curious now that you keep coming back and focusing on what we're trying to bring value to you is the big picture. And my question is, what is it that you can't do that an alliance like this can do, and we can get grants and do funding for studies to actually help you look at the big picture? And the big picture meaning, where is solar going? Energy storage, is it going to work on the large scale? Is it going to look better on the small scale? And somehow I see in the future that the location of utility scale solar or distributed and wind and energy storage has to depend on each other. So the question is, what are you doing to go there, and how can we interact to help you, or what kind of study you'd like to see?
Yeah, I just off the top of my head, one thing we've talked about, what I'd love to see is a way to take the storage component of that mix and put some value around that, whether that's a reliability metric of some sort. I think there's a cost that infrastructure costs that are avoided, so there's an avoided cost component. And how can we do that working through, I think through an industry association, we can do that in a way where we work with the utilities, we work with the infrastructure construction companies, we work with the renewable power suppliers, and we all work together to find a way to value that. Because I think that's a big metric in storage. People don't question whether there's value, it's how to value it and how to value it in the market. And that's one thing we just is an unknown for us. So.
Hi, thank you all for your presentation today. Very interesting in this, the future of renewables has got a whole component which I don't think we've really touched on too much here. So this question is for Ron. You spoke about General Motors and the things you're doing sort of within your industrial base, solar panels on your roof. But there's another part which is huge to all of us here. I drive one of your Chevy Volts. It is a magnificent car. My compliments all the way up and down the line. I have 3 constructive criticisms. I'll take offline with you. But it's a magnificent car. He
can't help you with the warranty.
Not a problem.
I can't relay stuff back.
It's not a Tesla, but I submit the value proposition on the Volt is much higher than the value proposition on the Tesla, even though it doesn't have quite exactly insane acceleration like the Tesla does. But the future of renewables includes this whole transportation component, and all the people that I know that drive electric cars that plug them into their solar systems, and it's a really big deal, part of this solution, and it's all part of the whole grid stability and interactive and bidirectional, grid discussion. Where does General Motors see this as far as their presentation of their product into the marketplace, as far as sort of near term and longer term as far as product offerings?
That's a good question. You left me stumped. No. I guess, I mostly deal obviously all on the facility side. But when you really look at it, I do bridge a lot of what I see the product potentially could support in regards to what the industry can support, and I do see them combined together. In fact, I bring that up all the time in a lot of our internal discussions, that the renewable component is a very key part of why we look at and sell electric vehicles. And when we look at investment in some of our direct use of renewables on site, for our employees to charge our electric vehicles as well, we lead in the area of electric vehicle workplace charging. I mean, if you're an employee, you have the right to come in and plug in. We don't charge employees. We don't do any of that stuff. And I say the next component of that is, it's just like you mentioned, we need to make sure there's solar and other renewable resources associated with that on our facilities to support the electric vehicle, and then educate the other 5,000 employees. I mean, there may be a handful of them that drive Volts right now, the other 5,000 employees. Then that ties into our community outreach of educating the employees about the importance of electric vehicles and how they truly can drive off sunshine and off renewables and off of green resources. So I see that. I try to link that together as much as I can. From a marketing standpoint, that's why the Chevy Carbon Reduction Initiative, where we don't really per se do it for our on-site direct procurement of utilities, but it's the importance to the consumer and to the purchase of our vehicles. So I guess in the long answer that, but in short answer, I try to do as much as I can to marry both together, because I do see the value of that, and I see a strong value as the electric vehicle becomes more prevalent, that the storage component of the battery associated with that electric vehicle, with the solar that you have on your home. I mean, one of the I guess, answers, and when we looked at the initial kind of Volt reuse of batteries, and I actually brought it up to the team, they brought me in late to the game, and I said, and this was right after Superstorm Sandy, and nobody even asked the question. I said, great, you can have an electric vehicle in your garage, and it's great you could run your home potentially off that electric vehicle, and it's great you could do it for a couple hours. What are you going to do after that? The grid was off for weeks, if not months in some cases. I have a friend who didn't have it for 3 months. I said, if you had solar and you had an electric vehicle, you had the ability to really run your home, charge during the day, run your home at night. Not all your appliances won't be able to air condition your home probably, but you'll at least have enough to have the comforts of home running both off solar and battery storage. So that was kind of the link that I brought to the folks that are working on the battery storage component, and even on the product program to some degree, that is one together when we look at it from a company perspective standpoint. It comes down to R&D, it comes down to the future of what we're looking at electric vehicles, it comes down to what we got at presence, and it comes down to our use of renewable energy and leading in that space.
So there's an important market potential that you just brought up, and I realized this when I was looking at putting on solar on my house, and I was considering battery storage, and I realized I've already got battery storage. It's in the Volt.
Yep.
And that's a big element. You guys don't leverage that at all, but it's a conceivable thing that could be leveraged in your whole business model as a much more fully integrated system with bidirectional powering your car from your house and your house from your car.
Yep. I definitely see it. I bring it up. I recognize they deal with it on the warranty side and everything else. But you can have someone like me to keep raising it. At some point, they're going to go, fine, you're right, let's go. What do we got to do?
Well, and I think they brought up Tesla and their Gigafactory, where they see that as a market for storage and not as much for their cars, but both. And I think that kind of outward pressure, or outside pressure coming in for other electric vehicle companies, will at least begs the question and starts the conversation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that we're about done, but I just would like to thank all of you for joining this panel. I think it was a really great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.